Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a terrific day ahead of you. This Everything You Need consists of 5 different sections. Number 1, free hit, when, where, and why. Number 2, the forwards, and many of them. Number 3, the big-hitting, attack-minded midfielders. Number 4, the defensive contribution, defensive-minded midfielders, and the trend that's occurring there. And finally, a big look at the Liverpool assets. All of these, as opposed to just having the tactical implications and player prospects within them, also have a heavy strategic element this time around, and I'm hoping that should make for a very good video. If at any point you think it does, a like, a hype, a subscribe would all be greatly appreciated. Your support always is. Without much else needing to be said, have a terrific day, enjoy the video, and get into it. Arsenal and Crystal Palace drew each other in the League Cup quarter-finals. However, even with that being the case, and even with Crystal Palace's schedule, it does not look like we will have a blank or double game week in the first half of the season. Certainly not resultant of that. And yes, something else could happen, but it is extremely unlikely. And with that being the case, you can now start to plan for your free hit. Usually, when you're using the free hit, you're using it towards the back end of the season, either to cover a blank resultant of the FA Cup ties, or to really attack a double game week, again, resultant of the FA Cup ties. This time around, you have neither of those things going on. As such, I think it is best, far better, at least at a minimum, for you to use the free hit in alignment with when your team looks significantly weak or there is a real opportunity with how your team is set up, as opposed to looking at what most people's optimal free hit week is and then going on with that. Now, will there be one for the masses? Yes, of course, right? There is a template for a reason. It consists of very good players. There will be a week where that template is a little bit weaker and you will see a mass amount of free hits being played. However, if your team is slightly differential, for whatever reason, maybe your rank's actually really good this time around, then you could consider playing it in a completely different week than others doing and continuing with your completely different strategy. And I really would consider playing it on your own accord when it's best in alignment for your own team, as opposed to just looking at what the masses do. Because it's not like the triple captain, right, where there is pretty much going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 standout opportunities across the entire set. This is really team dependent, right? So do what suits your team. That being said, here are some general guidelines that you could look to understand maybe when you could play your free hit the best in accordance with your own team. Free hit 12. If you were looking to completely back against Erling Haaland and backed Newcastle to do a very good job at home when they played him, then considering a lot of people will still captain him and everyone's pretty much going to own him, this could be an opportunity for you to pivot away and target some other fixtures. In game week 13 to 16, you could consider stacking Liverpool assets with Mohamed Salah, who you may not have otherwise because either you don't really have a route to him, you don't really want to sell Haaland, and you don't want Salah as well. So you stack Liverpool assets for either their Leeds fixture, their Sunderland fixture, their West Ham fixture, or maybe even their Brighton, if he's still here for game week 16, and you like that. And you avoid some of your long-term holds. For example, Chelsea play Arsenal in that period. Maybe you look at that and think, you know what, in game week 13, you look at that and think, I don't really fancy Arsenal at the bridge. I don't really fancy João Pedro, who I want for the long term. Let me just take all of them out, stack Salah. And if I am going in 13, I'm actually going to have some more Manchester City assets than usual. I'm even going to include some Brentford, who have Burnley at home. That could be a good week for you to do it, if that's in alignment with your thoughts. Game week 17 to 19, that is very much the festive period, and it also happens to be the congested period. And you're getting 5 free transfers in 16, but maybe you want to save those for a rainy day. And knowing you're going to have to use a free hit prior to the end of game week 19, you're like, okay, I'm just going to use it there. There's probably going to be some expected minutes worries in my team due to rotation or injury. And as such, I'm going to keep it for that. And it will be a really high floor opportunity for me as such. Could still be high ceiling, probably will, but at a bare minimum, it'll be high floor. That's another strategy that you could do. Now, within that time block, 12 to 19, you could even use it this week. Why not? If that's what you fancy. There are going to be many a time where there's at least one matchup that you don't particularly like. 13 is just a fairly obvious one with Chelsea Arsenal. Maybe in 14, you hate the fact that City are going away to Fulham and you think they're going to make it really tough, so you want to pivot out of them. Maybe there's just one particular game week where you want to side or you don't want to side. All these things will crop up and there will be opportunities for you and your particular team to pounce on. But don't think that you have to stick to any particular game week just because the masses are doing so. Then, in terms of the bench boost, should you not have used that? If you do have promoted defenders, 16/18, depending on which ones you have, looks like a decent time. 11 and 12, also with how the fixtures fall for promoted defenders, also look fairly decent. But otherwise, if your team is a bit different, again, it's team specific, and I wouldn't place too much emphasis on it. If it goes really well, you'll hit 20 points, and that is a really good score. If it goes pretty badly, but not too badly, you'll hit 10. Right, that's a difference of 10, but is it really worth accommodating for via free transfers and missing other opportunities? Probably not, at least not in a mass way, or unless you're super confident. So consider that. Don't place too much emphasis on it. Just look at maybe 11, 12, 16, 18 with promoted defenders, and then without them, it'd probably be easier regardless. Moving on to what is becoming a very interesting forward category, and we will start with the man above me, that is Victor Gyokeres. Should you sell him? Not if you own him, especially if you were there on wildcard 6. It is team dependent, of course, very much like the last section. But in most cases, I would say this is a fairly strong yes. We don't know the extent of the injury. Arteta has said that he's a little bit concerned at a minimum. He's said that's a muscular injury, and players like Gyokeres, given their explosivity, that can always be a bit of a concern. So you don't know. Maybe he's out for not just 11, but also 12 and also 13. And do you really want 9 million tied up in that spot, especially when it's an Arsenal spot? Probably not. So that's one big reason for selling. Not to mention the fact that at his price, he's blocking so many other moves if you were not to sell him, even this week, especially with 2 free transfers. And the fixtures after the break, Tottenham and Chelsea, probably aren't going to be the easiest either. I think they may be decent for him in particular. Stylistically, it could be okay. But overall, I don't think Arsenal would just rock up, and whether they'll win is a completely other thing, but I don't think they'll rock up and just completely dominate the game as they have done others recently. And Kai Havertz is not a million miles away from return. Mikel Merino is clearly a very capable number 9, so they don't really need to force him back. They have some depth and cover in those positions. So in most cases, I'm selling him very happily and comfortably so. I'm not going to speak about Erling Haaland. Of course, he looks to be the number 1 forward. You then have a maximum of 2 spots. And with those 2 spots, I would probably be filling them with 2 of João Pedro, Jarrod Bowen, and Jean-Philippe Mateta. If you were to play a 2-striker formation and have Mark Gui, which is, I think, perfectly justifiable with how things are gone, a structure like that, then you'd only need 1, and you really wouldn't need to look too far past this. I will speak about others in a second, but for me, having your other 2 spots filled with these 3 guys, 2 of them, I think would be very sensible. They all have different positives and negatives that I will explain now. João Pedro has probably the best fixture set coming up. Maybe Mateta can compete, but I'd say João Pedro's medium term just edges it a little bit, right? Has 2 promoted sides and has a Wolves side that look in trouble. And at least Arsenal's at home as well. Not that's a great fixture, but at least it's at home. And he is the Giant Slayer after all. The one reason I like him so much is just a quality of player, surrounded by the quality of team and the players that he plays with. Just for me means that over a long enough period, similar to Bruno Fernandes in a way, albeit through different routes, his floor is going to be quite high. And I think when you're paying that amount of money, and which isn't too much all things considering, having that is wonderful. And he still does have a ceiling. Yeah, he hasn't really shown it since that West Ham game. He missed chances against Fulham when he should have hauled. He should have hauled easily against Spurs. And he missed chances. Some others missed chances. They didn't play him in at the right time, and so on and so on. But at least the soft signs are there. And the underlying statistics and signs are there that eventually he is going to haul. I wouldn't say particularly often, because that's not something that he's shown himself capable of as of yet. But I think you'll get enough. And at that price, I think it'll be quite solid. Also means you don't have to keep chopping and changing, right? Set and forget, use your transfers elsewhere. If you didn't want him, then Bowen. I mean, over again, a long enough span, super reliable. I think with what I saw against Newcastle, it seemed like that side had got their mojo back a little bit. I think having Potts in the midfield and trusting him is a very good thing for their attack. It allows Paquetá to be higher, and it solves their build-up issue. I think them not being so left-hand side ball dominant and getting the ball into Bowen more. With the quality he's now surrounded by, like Wan-Bissaka, Potts, Paquetá, Fernandes, Wilson, that's a really good hit. And as such, I would be fairly comfortable in saying that over a long enough span, he's certainly going to get enough returns. Now, it's just timing it with him can be slightly challenging, as we've seen in times in the past. And who knows, maybe West Ham drop off a little bit. But overall, over a long enough span, I think he'll be very solid. And you know what? As far as fixture proof goes, he's kind of up there. Like in these big games against these big teams, he doesn't mind a goal, right? We've seen it many a time in the past. Mateta's probably my favorite out of the three. Not so much just due to the fixtures, because I think JP can compete with him there, but his ceiling, or the floor really, because both of these guys have enough quality to have a high floor, but it's the ceiling. He looks the most likely to haul on at least somewhat consistent basis, relatively speaking. And I just like that, having that upside in my team. The fixtures are there, the teammates are there, the platforming's there, his quality's there. So for me, this is number one. I think between Bowen and Pedro is quite close, but I go JP as my number two, and then Bowen three. But that being said, I don't think there's that much in it between Bowen and Mateta. And had he hauled against Newcastle, which he very easily, very, very easily could have done, and João Pedro maybe scored a 15-pointer, you may reflect on this slightly differently. Hence why I say it is really close, I think, between the three. Now, I personally wouldn't go past any of these guys. I don't think you need to. I think they're cheap enough. But if you want to go down, I've warmed to the Danny Welbeck pick, considering the lack of depth they have in that option. Hurts us clearly quite happy to play him there. I do think it's a bit of a risk, though, because I just don't ever trust Brighton fully to stay good over an extended period of time. There'll always be a game where they should win, and it should be fairly comfortable, and they'll somehow mess it up. And I am slightly concerned about his ceiling as well. So I probably wouldn't go there, but I've warmed to it. Ekitike could and would be great if it wasn't for Alexander Isak impacting his expected minutes. And at this price, you really need him to be great because he's a significant amount more than some of the other very good options. And as such, I'd avoid him for now. But if there ever comes a moment where Isak's injury is a bit more long-term, or Ekitike just looks like he's going to start game in, game out, I wouldn't mind taking on one of the big three above with him, but not for now. Quite happy I didn't go Voldemort. As much as I really like the player, Newcastle's attacking dynamics, his ceiling looks, just with what I've seen from him so far, looks a little bit limited compared to at least, even forget Mateta, but even Bowen as well. And his expected minutes prone to an earlier substitution, more so than Mateta or Bowen, and JP to an extent, means that I wouldn't go here. When João Pedro, Bowen, and Mateta exist at similar-ish price points, Ollie Watkins could be an interesting one. I mean, everyone kind of wrote Aston Villa off. They come back with four wins on the bounce. I didn't like their approach at Anfield. But even with Watkins, people have written him off in the past, and then will just come up with at least a streak of goals. And the fixtures coming up for him, we'll speak about with Rodgers, probably going under the radar. They're quite good. And at 8.5, he's no longer as expensive as he once was. And he certainly has the ceiling. So he did want to go here. I'd consider it. They do have Europe. It seems like he's constantly battling somewhat of like a little fitness struggle. So expected minutes, and Emery's more than happy to sub him off. So expected minutes might be a bit down. But if you can catch him just in that good little period, I think there's a big reward for you. There, of course, comes with it, though, the risk of everything that I've spoken about prior. From the bigger hitting forwards to the bigger hitting attack-minded midfielders. And there is no Moises Caicedo, Declan Rice, Granit Xhaka, who of course are doing phenomenally well in the scoring charts this season, because they're on the next slide. For good reason, as you will see. I'll start with Bukayo Saka, and I wouldn't buy him. I know he's fairly popular amongst the community this week, given that Gyokeres is out. But I don't think that Gyokeres is out is good for him. I spoke about in the past that Gyokeres' impact on the Arsenal side in terms of how he creates this verticality, whereas Havertz wouldn't, because he was instructed to drop into these right-hand side 8-like zones, completely leaving the other two centre-backs on the opposition team unoccupied. Mean that for me, at least now, Bukayo Saka would have some more space because of what the opposition would have to account for in earlier stages of build-up, at least, which I think translated to Arsenal being more dangerous. Not to mention the fluidity of the fullbacks as well, but specifically speaking about the Saka-Gyokeres dynamic. Without that, I'm not as convinced that he's going to be as good of an asset. All you have to do is look at the second half against Burnley, and it was not exactly the most threatening half you've seen Arsenal put up this season. He also doesn't have someone to pass into in behind. He doesn't have someone to occupy the centre backs as much as Marina will drop a little bit more. He's a bit more associative in those central pockets. So with that being said, with Sunderland not clearly not being just a walkover, then you have Spurs and Chelsea, which I wouldn't be surprised if he returns /hold in both, or at least one. But you're probably not going to captain him. I don't think you can really rely on hauls from him, as we've spoken about. And he's expensive, so he's going to block other positions. He's also probably going to require 2 frees. And you may not want him long term, so I probably wouldn't. I probably wouldn't go there. And I think for very good reason. If you did want to go there, I get it. I mean, he's still Saka. I own him. I really liked what I saw when I first bought him, and I don't think the returns have been quite indicative of either the performance, definitely not the performance, nor so the quality of player. But now that 3 of the good fixtures have gone, and we're getting into a tougher run where there's other assets like Liverpool ones emerging who are more expensive, and United ones, and maybe some of the other guys here, I'd probably jump off. Well, not jump off, not sell, but I wouldn't jump on. I've spoken about how I'm a big fan of the Manchester United mids, particularly because they don't have Europe midweek, and the amount of quality those 3 have, good enough in any given moment to get you a return. I wouldn't mind waiting 1 week because obviously Spurs coming off the back of a win. They're so up and down like a yo-yo this season. But you can't, especially with it being the early kickoff, you can't for certain say that, because Spurs were very poor this game, they'll be very poor the next, right? Because clearly, like I said, they've been a bit of a yo-yo this season. If Man United did slap them up a bit, I really wouldn't be too surprised. I think especially if they leave that space for Mbeumo to exploit, like Chelsea could have done at times, but didn't do so as well. He could really hurt them. Cunha with those carries and then getting off a shot, especially with the amount of space he may have again, even if it is in between the lines, could really hurt them. Bruno, so much quality, pops up with a moment. Again, more space in attack, maybe slightly higher in certain moments, maybe hurting them in transition. Can get returns there. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did really well. Equally, if Spurs put in a bit of a performance, I don't think that'd shock anyone. United still are my favourites for this game, but given the quality of opposition, I do think you can wait. However, whether it be this week or in the near future, having one at least, I think could be really, really, really good for the reasons discussed. Lastly, Mbeumo's not my number 1. He's not even my number 2. I have him at number 3. Reason being is, if you look at the games where he's returned, Burnley, and consider how they played on that day and how they set up Liverpool and Brighton, clearly he's exploited the stylistic matchups, which have always been on paper better for him. Whereas in the other ones, he hasn't as much. And I think with the ones coming up, Palace, Everton, not so much Spurs, but Palace, Everton, after that, that's more the Cunha type. And then Bruno, for me, so safe. DEFCON, and when he hits even one attack and return, the potential on bonus, and then just the general quality to get returns fairly regularly. And penalties, that would be my number 2/1. Cunha number 1 and 2, same with Bruno. And I'd have him Mbeumo 3, purely for the fixtures coming up. He's also a bit expensive now at 8.4 compared to starting at 8. That's that. Enzo Fernandez, Iliman Ndiaye, Dominic Szoboszlai, all very different. One's more of a right winger, one's more of whether he's playing right back or right central midfield. Enzo Fernandez will play on the left, he'll play on the right. He'll have more deeper responsibilities, he'll have box crushing responsibilities, 10-light responsibilities. It's very different, but I like all of them. I think they've overall got very solid fundamentals. Enzo probably the worst for DEFCON, actually, but maybe still there just in a small capacity, maybe once every X amount of games. A larger X, but nonetheless. Szoboszlai, clearly very good on DEFCON and has routes into attacking points, especially with playing right centre mid more. Ndiaye, penalties, and then just overall quality on the ball to get him returns, whether that be goals, assists if his teammates could finish better, and also DEFCON. And then Enzo, the role with the fixtures could all translate to goals and assists. So those 3, I like it a lot. If you had all 3, I would have no complaints. If you had 2, 1, I think it's great. So big fan of all of those. You may be slightly concerned about their ceiling in any given game because all of them could be a bit more ruthless in that sense with G&A, but you know you can still get it at times because they still got that capacity. It's just not going to be super often, I don't think. But in a good patch, man, they could be unbelievable value. Morgan Rogers is one who's now 6.8, so very similar price tags to these guys, and I think he's now at the stage where he's underrated. Recently, his performances have been miles better than they were at the start of the season. The fixtures are there, like I spoke about with Ollie Watkins. The form is there, in my opinion, as well, following the performances. Emery loves him so much, he will never hook him unless he really, really has to. And he did say that maybe even Morgan could take them because they kept missing so many penalties. I also feel like he's got the personality for it. So at 6.8, with those fixtures, super underrated asset for me. And if he came good, wouldn't be the tiniest bit surprised. There's someone who's not mentioned on here. And I had this same thing with him last season, Morgan Gibbs-White. The fixtures coming up are decent. They're not like spectacular, but for him, they're decent. And last season, there was this time where he hadn't accumulated many GNA. And I noticed with him, he always accumulates a very similar amount, and he's also quite streaky. He's just got that goal against Man United, and I wonder if this could be the start. He usually averages 1 G/A every 2 games. You just look at his last 3 seasons, and he's currently on 2 in 10. The fixtures coming up, especially Leeds next at home, wouldn't be the tiniest bit surprised if this is his streak. So you wanted a punt, you wanted a differential, there's something to consider. Not to mention he's got quality as well, right? Then Salah/Semenyo. I know some people are getting a little bit impatient or unhappy with them. Fair enough. 3 blanks in a row. I wouldn't, though. I don't think it's the most efficient use of an FT. And they're all, I think, especially with Salah, he'll blank for a few games and then he'll just explode with a haul. So I wouldn't, especially at the price. Give it maybe 1 more at least. And then Semenyo, you lose a lot of value, and the fixtures coming up look great. Looks to be higher ceiling this season. Don't think it's the most efficient use of an FT. Albeit if you were to sell both of them, I would get it. Just not my preference. And I've talked up a lot of other options here, so if you wanted to take the risk, you can certainly do so. Very justifiably, in my opinion. Just not my personal preference. But I do want to reiterate again that I get it, because there could be an opportunity there. I don't like the Gakpo Minter picks. Gakpo, because even yesterday, I don't think too many people were expecting him to drop for the Real Madrid lineup. And he's always prone to an early substitution. Slot's very ruthless in that sense. And I don't think you want to be paying this much for your Liverpool slot when Slot can always just take it away from you very quickly. Also, maybe he doesn't have I wouldn't say this high ceiling's not there. I just say it's not super realistic, right? Because he does have enough volume for him to get that. Minter, I've said it so many times. I don't like it because there's never the ceiling there because of the lack of ruthlessness in the final third. Yeah, I know he got a 9-pointer against Leeds, but it's probably not getting too much better than that for a while at least. So not my cup of tea when all of these other guys exist. Yeah, they're a little bit more expensive, but certainly worth it in my opinion. To hold these guys, I get. Not my preference having them in the team, but to hold, I'd get it. I just wouldn't actively go and seek them out to buy. Is there a new meta in FPL? The defensive contribution midfielders, at least that's how they were perceived at the start of the season, /CDMs, have had a phenomenal season all around. It's not just Declan Rice, Moises Caicedo, Granit Xhaka that you can see on screen, that are listed on screen. It's also João Palhinha, right? And there's others as well who play that number 6-like position, rack up defensive contributions, but they're also getting goals and assists, and that is making them arguably the best value picks in the game, alongside Gabriel, of course. And is that here to stay? And do we really need to prioritize picking these type of players over your Bukayo Saka's, Ismail Assar's, and the likes? I think you'd have to take it on a case-by-case basis. I look at Granit Xhaka, and I feel like I pretty much know what I'm getting over the course of the season. I'm getting a lot of defensive contributions, and I will get X amount of attacking returns. Now, the exact number, I cannot tell you, but there is a span from what I would say is fairly healthy to very healthy for his position and for his price tag. I know the quality that he has on him. Right? I've seen it repeat many, many, many times. And I know that's probably going to translate to X amount of returns over the season. And as such, at that price tag, he has a super healthy floor. You could even view him as a 5 million defender, right? Who, instead of getting 4 points for a clean sheet, is going to get 1, but it's so consistent you're going to get defensive contributions that 2/3 pointer is going to be on the cards fairly often, at least a 2-pointer. Whereas just pure clean sheets wouldn't be, so it's very much going to be 0 or 4 in that regard, or 2 or 4, considering they can get DEFCON as well. But of course, -1 for an extra 2 goals. So you kind of know what you're getting from Xhaka, and he's really going to be able to compete with defenders as such. So could you just play a 3 at the back and start him pretty much every week and pick up returns in that fashion? Yeah. And will the floor be great? Yeah. And you'll probably never slip too far behind. With Rice, he's got it 3 times in 10 games. Let's just say that continues. With his set-piece delivery and just him getting better and better in open play and getting returns, he again could be great value. And someone with a super high floor. Maybe not the high ceiling, but a super high floor. To be honest with him, you'll get a high ceiling game where he hits like a 16-pointer. I wouldn't be surprised. Caicedo, people say that the volume of attacking returns is unsustainable. Maybe to this extent, yeah. But he does have a pile driver on him. He's clearly willing to jump and press, and he can get assists and goals from that, and he's clearly willing to shoot from outside of the box. The more blocks you come up against, the more opportunities you are going to have to shoot from range because it's a good block breaking dynamic. So these guys really, really could be excellent value. And it's not so much me taking anything away from them. I wouldn't expect them to present as good value down the line in comparison to what they're doing now, purely for the fact I expect the attackers, right? Mbeumo, Bruno, Cunha, Saka, Salah, Sarr, Mateta, JP Bowen, so on and so on, right? These mid to fairly expensive priced forwards and midfielders that hit a bit of form and hit a gear whereby, okay, the hauls are coming a bit more consistently. We're also going to tap into the bonus points as such, which maybe the DEFCON mids won't do so as often. And that's how we can start to at least compete. Because right now, they're slapping them all around the park, right? I mean, you start with Rice, Caicedo, Xhaka. You can just build pretty much any team around that. That includes Haaland, a stacked defense, and you'll be number one in the world in FPL if you had done so. Now, why? Why are these attackers not getting the type of returns? Well, I think there's been a shift in the Premier League. I think the data says that as well. Teams are becoming very, very physical. They're clearly more and more willing to set up in blocks, not just the smaller teams, but even the bigger ones as such, transitioning into those deep blocks. And they're very hard to break down. And the other thing is you have these physical players. You have these transition monsters. You're not filled with the block breaking types in your David Silvas and Juan Matas because it's very difficult to accommodate for them out of possession, but also in possession when you want to play a more transition-based game. What I expect is that these attackers won't just go through the whole season getting defeated by this new system and era of football, but rather they'll find solutions and teams will find solutions. Maybe they'll become a little bit less transitional in nature and focus a bit more on block breaking, and you'll see them more score more goals. But until that happens, yeah, this could absolutely continue. I do think at some point, maybe in the near future, these attackers will get better for the reasons discussed, but I don't think they're going anywhere per se. Rice, Caicedo, Xhaka, Palini, etc. Can they keep up the volume of attacking returns? Xhaka is not doing like incredibly well in that sense, so yeah, he definitely can. Rice, with Arsenal's open play threat, him getting better and better in that regard and set pieces, yes. Caicedo probably goes a notch down, but wouldn't be too surprised. So the overall answer to this question is yeah. And I think where that leaves you is that if you're going to try and bet on those attackers because you want to capture the bigger hauls, especially over a short span, fairly consistently, more than ever, the timing is so important. It's not just enough to see 2-2-2 on the FDR. The stylistic matchup, the matchup of the overall team, the individual matchups, the form, so many things need to be taken into account and done so with more importance because you get it wrong, like, you're going to go 2 points behind every single game, 3 points behind. You get it wrong when the DEFCON midfielders are flying, it's going to be very difficult to catch up. Very, very difficult to catch up. So that's my take on this, and certainly something to consider. The only team that gets their own section in this video, and that is Liverpool. They, of course, went on that really rough run of 4 defeats back to back to back to back. But following their win against Aston Villa, and more so the defensive performance against Real Madrid, it looks like they're back, at least in some capacity. And with that fixture swing coming up, it may just be the best time for them to do so, at least in terms of FPL, so that you can pick them up. You can argue it's in 12 for Forest at home. I'd say that's just a middling fixture, especially under Dyche and considering how he likes to play. I wouldn't be one bit surprised if he's far more progressive and expansive than he was in his time at Burnley or even Everton. But still, I think you know what you're going to get when you go to Anfield, to some extent at least. So I'd really say it starts from 13. But even 13, like you look at West Ham, much better against Newcastle. They get better and better. They have the manager to develop them. Then maybe this isn't the fixture as well. And maybe there just aren't that many good fixtures that you can look at when you view even 3 weeks out. Maybe it's really just capitalizing on a side who are just in poor form and you don't time the end of it. Are they back on the menu? Overall, I'd say your tier 1 assets are Szoboszlai, Salah, and Van Dijk. Again, all to varying degrees and all have different positives and negatives. Salah, easily a high ceiling and the most captainable, but super expensive. If you are to have with Haaland, certainly makes big compromises elsewhere. Yeah, you could just fill your team with those DEFCON mids. You absolutely could, but maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want a mix of more attackers, like out-and-out attackers, and those DEFCON mids, or none of them at all. So he blocks a lot of other stuff across the pitch. And if you do have him in a Haaland, you captain him, you're not captaining Haaland, which at times will be very risky. And maybe not even your complete preference, right? Van Dijk I just like a lot. I mean, DEFCON's clean sheets will probably come if Liverpool are to defend in a similar, at least to a similar level like they did against Real Madrid. And he's got that bullet header on him. We always know it's coming every season. So I don't think a 17 point is too far away. Szoboszlai, I spoke about earlier in the video, right? A right centre midfield with his technical empathy, with his technical quality. And I specify technical empathy because having a player like Salah on your right, having that quality, which for those of you who don't know is essentially just your weight of pass when you pass it to them, as opposed to just smashing into them and being like, oh, look, I passed it to you. It's really accommodating for what they want and their preferences as well. Hence the name technical empathy. It's something which is a wonderful route to returns. Not to mention his ball striking from range and overall quality as well, and set pieces. So I would say that he's a top option, and maybe both I'd have above Salah, especially over a long span, because they need a fair few free transfers to restructure properly. And like I said, you can't captain him and Haaland doesn't look very sellable at the moment. But those are my tier 1 assets. And if you went Salah, I'd completely get it. So those are those three. The other guys, Konate, Gravenberch, Bradley, Ekitike, Wirtz, and Gakpo, all have their positives, and I would get it. However, Gakpo, fairly expensive, and I spoke about earlier, with the expected minutes, not for me. But still hasn't got a goal or assist in the Premier League yet. Might not want to tie in the bottom. And also, I don't think he's playing in this free-flowing manner that I'd want from Wirtz. I think maybe that's probably just resultant of confidence. And he's just not trying as many things as I would like on the pitch that I think he could do so. I think at times he's taking the safe decision to retain the ball by passing it to his teammate or not trying to burst through a gap. And I think if you had that, you'd get more goals and assists out of Wirtz. But where that's not the case, probably not for now. Ekitike, spoke about earlier. Isak, and as such, expected minutes. Bradley, just in case Szoboszlai plays right back for a game, but also a lack of DEFCON. But otherwise, I don't mind it. Gravenberch, I don't think he'll get too many goals and assists. And if you did want to go for a DEFCON midfielder, I'd go for some of the other guys discussed. Konate, just not as good on DEFCON as Van Dijk, but all things considered at the price and the fact he's got a header on him, I think solid enough. Albeit he does like to score in the Champions League, far more so than the Prem. So I'd get those guys, but I wouldn't for all the reasons discussed. And also, a lot of them are quite expensive, relatively speaking. With Szoboszlai, less so, but more so with Salah and Van Dijk. If you are to go there, they're obviously very expensive in their own right, especially Salah. And I would really consider the combinations of picks you're getting. For example, if you're getting Salah, let's say you're also getting Caicedo and Xhaka, right? Whereas if you're not, maybe you're getting Bruno and then Mbeumo and Rodgers. So it's not just Salah, right? And I think you really have to assess the combinations that you're bringing in with his Liverpool assets as such. But overall, Szoboszlai and Van Dijk, probably my preferences. Really like that, especially Van Dijk. Salah, I completely understand. And maybe he just hits that other gear and he's worth it because we can captain him more. And the DEFCON midfielders just look like great value, so we can have them. And you don't need some of the other guys, or don't want some of the other guys. They don't look like the greatest value. And yeah, they look better. So in 12-13, you can absolutely pounce on it. And that is probably a very brief, but I'd say concise summary of where Liverpool are currently at. Even with me saying that, there is one thing I wanted to speak about. The defensive performance against Real Madrid. I think, again, it showed that Slot certainly has a tactical flexibility within him to provide solutions to tough periods and different and harder moments in games. And if he has that, which he does, clearly, as we saw Ipswich away GAMEWEEK 1 last season, that will allow the players at some point at least to be better platformed, and hence the returns probably will come, right? The defense, it looks a lot more solid now. He said in an interview on CBS with Jamie Carragher, which was actually very funny if you want to go and watch it, that we're either pressing high or we're blocking deep. We're not anywhere else. We're not in between. Now, he did say a large reason of that was for Mbappe and Vinny. But if it works so well, maybe he translates that into a City game. And maybe he looks at Forest with their attacking quality. He's like, let's do the same. And then he's like, even West Ham have a lot of attacking quality. We'll do the same. And why change it when it's working? So I think you can definitely expect this upturn, including defensively, not just offensively. That is all she wrote for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I certainly hope you enjoyed. The reason I finished on this slide is because there hasn't been too much talk about the free hit and incorporating it within your strategy. But now that it looks like there's no blank or doubles in the first half of the season, very much would look at doing so because it will affect your other transfer plans and it very will likely put you down a whole different course of action that you were looking at prior. So like I said, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, a like, hype, or subscribe would be greatly appreciated. And I shall see you very soon in about 24 hours time for team selection. Have a terrific day in the meantime.